Last week we had a guest speaker here, this guy here, Nate Evans, works with Youth with a Mission organization in Tyler, Texas. Nate, for 3 years, spoke every other week here. Many of you know that. If you're a guest here, you would know that. But Nate is here visiting with his bride. Before this service is over, if Savannah's here, great, but if not, we want to pull you forward and just like Nate is our missionary, our church's missionary, we feel like, and we want to support him. Nate brought a message last week, and we had so many replies and responses that were like, wow, man, this really messed with my heart and affected me, that when I found out Nate was going to be staying through, we thought he was leaving last week. He's staying through Tuesday of this week. We asked him to speak again. So, Nate?
Thanks, Dad. Well, good morning. You know, as of last week, we didn't know we were going to be staying through Sunday either. We kind of decided at the last minute, and then as soon as he found out, he asked me to speak, and I'm like, heck, why not? No time to prepare, hadn't thought of anything to say, but sometimes you experience enough things that you just got stuff you want to talk about anyways. That's what I said last week, and I felt the same way this week. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Dad, for those of you who don't know me, you know, I was on staff with Life Church for 3 years, and I was the teaching pastor, so I spoke a lot on Sunday mornings and worked in small groups and stuff like that. Currently, my wife and I are over in Texas, Tyler, Texas, working with Youth with a Mission, which is a mission organization that's goal is to take people who have had zero experience in ministry and take them from point A all the way into ministering into the reaches of the world, whether it's a third world country or whether it's in the streets of Chicago. So what I do is I'm a teacher with a ministry called School of the Bible, and the whole idea behind School of the Bible is to take everything good about seminary, in which you spend all this time studying, and then remove everything that is focused on the academic for the sake of the academic, if you know what I mean, because that becomes a problem. You get this intellectualism in Christianity where the Bible is studied for the sake of the Bible as opposed for the sake of the living God. And we boil that down into a year, and the goal is to take people, Christians who want to serve God and turn them into not only people who have been discipled, but people who will create disciples, who will create disciples, who will create disciples. So that's what I do. I believe that's incredibly valuable. Because that's the kingdom of God. That's multiplication. That's what Jesus did. He created 12 guys who ultimately went out and created hundreds more, who went out and created hundreds more and hundreds more, hundreds more. It's multiplying so we can see the gospel in every corner of the earth, not just spoken once and then left there, but taken and bringing people to a point where they can continue to create more disciples and so on and so forth. So that's what we do. If you want to know more about that, I'll be around here later today if you're interested in joining our prayer team or our support team or just want to get more information. But enough about that. How many of you guys were here last week? Okay, so most of you. For those of you who were, this is going to be sort of like a bit of a part two. It's going to be a very natural extension from what I talked about last week. And then for those of you who weren't here, none of this is going to make any sense and will not be useful to you. It's a joke. It will be useful to you. It's attached, but it's standalone at the same time, and it's just valuable, important stuff. The theme of today, and I believe I have a slide up here. The word of the day is perspective. The word of the day is perspective, and the message title today is Walk with Perspective. And this is important to me, and I'm talking about this at all because I'm really, really, really convinced that regardless of what we're experiencing right now, what I'm experiencing, what you're experiencing, what we've experienced in the past, and what we'll experience in the future, I think regardless of what is going on around us, regardless of our circumstances, I really and truly believe that each of us, have reason to be optimistic in our lives. And not a blind optimism that closes its eyes and says, kumbaya, kumbaya, everything is good, regardless of whether it is or not, but a reason that goes beyond our circumstances and beyond what we're seeing and experiencing right now. And it has everything to do with perspective. Those of you who were here last week can probably figure out why this is important to me. For those of you who weren't there, and for those of you who don't know me and my family, a year ago last week, my wife was diagnosed with brain cancer. We have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I shared about this last week, but that day where she went down with a massive seizure out of nowhere just launched my family into the hardest period of life we had ever experienced by far. It's been very, very difficult, and not even in an abstract sense, but in a day-to-day, moment-by-moment sense. And what I've found is, if I am not being extremely intentional about walking with the correct perspective, I will instantly get depressed, and I will get very angry, and I'll get very bitter. Because the circumstances in our life right now are, they're hard. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about, not just in my life, but in your life. A lot of us are walking with hard stuff. And when life is hard, it's like a force, and it's pushing you, and it's pushing you down, and it's forcing you to respond in a way. And when those circumstances are negative, it's very easy to respond in the wrong way. And so for me, if I'm not walking with the correct perspective, I get a little more than bent out of shape very quick, which is going to affect my wife, and it's going to affect my children, it's going to affect my ministry, and it's going to affect where my life is going, the course of my life. My wife has the same thing, because it's not I don't know if you guys have ever had a period of life where things have been okay, you know? It's like maybe not quite super easy or super great, but they haven't been actively bad. Maybe you're in a place in life like that right now, where you can have like that Sunday morning encouraging message, and it kind of fills you up, and then you can go a whole week without getting filled up again. You ever been in a period of life like that? Some of you are like, no. See, but sometimes, some of you guys know exactly what I'm talking about, you get in a period of life where you'll get that boost on Sunday morning, and you're like, you know what, I can do this. I've got the correct perspective. And 3 hours later, you're like, my life is garbage. I don't want to, you know, everything is awful. It's like sometimes you're in a place in life where you need that perspective injection every couple hours, or you'll lose your mind. That's where we're at right now. But regardless of where you're at in your life, and regardless of how hard your life is or how easy your life is compared to whoever, the point is, if we're not intentional to walk with perspective, life comes at you fast. And you can get bogged down and very negative very quick. How many of you are on social media in some form or another? Do you find that, and maybe you kind of call out your friends and pick and choose what you see on your news feeds, but how many of you find that you are predominantly reading negativity in your social media feed? Seems like with me. How many of you guys like to watch the evening news? Would you say it's more of a positive experience or a negative experience? So what sells? Negativity sells for some reason or another. I don't know what it is. People seem to feel like it's almost therapeutic to be negative about things. Is it? It's the opposite of therapeutic, those of you who have tried to be negative about something. But for whatever reason, negativity is the trend. I don't know if it's just this, you know, the last 25 years or so, but it seems like it's very popular to be a pessimist, to complain about things, to look on the cup is half empty side of it. Any of you guys natural optimists in here? Have a really easy time being like, things are great, you know, like your leg's broken and your car's in a ditch, and you're like, but you know, I've got 2 arms that still work. And anyone like that? Like, I saw Connor raise his hand. I'm like, you know, I could totally see that exact image with you in that situation, smiling and saying those things to Lindy. Yeah, I am not that. Is anyone the opposite of that? Do you find to have an easy time looking on the bad side of stuff? I find it very natural. I don't know what it is. I call it realism when I'm in a bad mood, but really it's pessimism. I want you guys to do something, whether you believe it or not yet, and I hope you believe it by the end of this message, but I want you to do something for me anyway. Look over to the person next to you and say, I have reason to be optimistic. You have reason to be optimistic, and I really, really believe that. I really, really believe that. And for whatever reason, we like to tell ourselves the opposite of that. Anyone here talk to themselves? In the mirror, or in the car, or mutter under your breath, or even in your head, maybe? Probably most of us. Have you ever just like, something's gone wrong, and you just mutter every negative thing you can think in your mind or in your head? You're like, this is that kind of thing. But talk to my wife. I am that. I'm a mutterer, you know. I mutter under my breath about every bad thing that's happening. It's not helpful. It's never been helpful. It just kind of seems to snowball. It's like something bad happens and another little thing, and then it snowballs more and more and more as I talk to my own head. Everything's horrible. Life is awful. This is miserable. But here's the thing. There's people everywhere for whatever reason, at least in this culture. Maybe it's not this way in other cultures, but here it is anyway. It is very popular to be negative and to complain about everything that is going wrong and to look on the dark side of things. It's the popular thing. You look on the news, it's all about how the economy is doomed and how our morals are falling apart in this country, how churches are shrinking and the school systems stink, and how millennials, I'll just stop right there, millennials. But here's the reality, here's the thing. As Christians, should we be the group that says, everything is awesome, everything is good, everything is perfect? No, don't tell me about that bad stuff. Everything is good, man. Is that our job? Would it be reasonable of me to close my eyes to the suffering that my wife is experiencing, my children are experiencing, to the hardship we're going through, and just say, everything is great. You know what? I claim this. I claim greatness and happiness in the name of Jesus, and the universe or Jesus or whoever will send it to me as long as I say it to myself enough times. Is that a thing? You guys have heard of like pop psychology, right? It's a very popular thing these days to speak a thing into existence. And if you say it enough times, you'll begin to believe it maybe, and maybe it'll begin to be reflected in your life. Is that what we do as Christians? It's kind of a trick question, isn't it? Because in one way, we shouldn't be always repeating the negative stuff, but in another sense, we also just can't lie to ourselves, right? There is a such thing as deluding ourselves. Because here's the reality, and this is just the reality. There are a lot of bad things happening in the world right now. Here's the reality. There are a lot of things going wrong in your life right now. Do you guys agree with that? Anyone debate me on that? There's a lot of bad stuff happening in my life right now. It's not easy, and it's not happy most of the time. But that's just, to a degree, you've got to be realistic, right? There are things that are hard. There are things that are painful. Sometimes we're experiencing persecution at work or hardship or a disease or suffering, just whatever it is. Some things are going wrong in life. We have to be realistic about that. And again, we can't just pull the... I call it the ostrich when I see people doing that. Where they just stick their head in the sand and go, everything is good in my little sand cave I've built for my head. So I can't see anything around me. Everything's good. Or like the owl that's like, if I can't see the bad things can't see me. That's a lack of awareness, right? That's delusion to a degree. And that's not our job as Christians. We're not to delude ourselves. But I really, really believe that even though life can be hard, and even regardless of how bad my life gets, whether it gets better from here or whether it gets worse from here, I believe that I have genuine reason to be optimistic about my life. Not to just be blindly happy, but to be genuinely and truthfully optimistic about my life and about my existence and about where I'm at, and my family as well. And I believe that's true for every single one of us. And I believe that if we can learn to walk with perspective continually, it's really going to change a lot of the way that we're able to live through hardship and through suffering. I really believe that not just because I read it in a book and not because I learned it in school, but because if I had not figured out how to do this in the last year, I would have lost it a long time ago. And it took me about 3 months of losing it before God said, you got to figure this out, Nate. You're going to lose you're going to lose it, man. You're going to lose your family. You're going to lose it. So I had to figure this out pretty quick. And I've seen the difference that it makes. So this is close to my heart. This is very close to my heart. And again, this isn't a pop psychology thing, although there is something to be said about looking on the bright side, as silly as that sounds. There's a verse in Proverbs chapter 11 that says, if you seek for evil, you are going to find it. If you look for good, you are going to find it. So there's something to be said about that. But here's what I want to say really, really clearly as we get into the meat of this thing. If you're taking notes, I would write this one down. I am not optimistic based on what I feel. You hear that one? I am not optimistic about my life based upon what I feel or what I see or even upon my circumstances right now. If my optimism or if my happiness or if my joy or my peace or my perspective rested upon what I'm feeling right now, then I am absolutely not optimistic about my life right now. Because what is happening around me is negative. Almost exclusively in life right now, things are hard. Things are really tough. On a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis, it is a struggle. So my optimism or my perspective does not rest upon what I feel or what I see or what I experience around me in my circumstances. I'm not optimistic based on what I feel. I'm optimistic based upon what God has told me. Make sense? If it doesn't yet, it will in a minute. But our optimism and our perspective and our peace and our joy and our being okay in life cannot rest upon our circumstances. It cannot rest upon what we're feeling. There was a period of life where Savannah and I, at first we were not okay with the way things were going. And we're like, God, we are not okay. We can't survive through this. You've got to put an end to it. You've got to heal her. And then he didn't heal her. And he just kind of left us there. And so then we finally came to a point where we're like, you know what? We can be okay. We can try to survive, right? You ever been in a period of life where you're like, I'm going to buckle down and I'm going to make it through this hard period of life, and then things will let up eventually. You ever been in a period of life like that? You in a period of life like that right now? Things are really hard and you're like, you know what? I'm going to last. I can make it and things will get better eventually. And then I can start running and moving and doing the things that I feel like I need to do or want to do. We were like that for a little while. It took us a few months of not being okay, and then we decided we were going to be okay. And okay for us meant we're going to survive. We're going to just try to make it without losing our minds, without losing our faith. We're going to buckle down until God relieves us. And that lasted for a few months before God started telling us, how long are you going to sit on your butts and wait for something to change? That's what we were doing. He said, how long are you going to sit on your butts and wait for me to give you an answer to prayer that I may or may not give you? Because we were just barely trying to make it with our marriage. We were just barely trying to make it with our parenting, trying to just make it with ministry, trying to just make it with our relationship with God. It was like, let's maintain the status quo. If we can just keep our heads barely above water, we'll be okay. God said to us really, really clearly, he made this so clear to me, and it was really tough to make this transition. But he said, and I talked about this a bit last week, he said, if I never change an iota about your circumstances right now, are you going to sit on your butt forever and just be okay until you die? Are you just going to maintain the status quo for 10, 20, 30 years? Or are you going to give up at some point and then walk away? I'm like, what do you want of me, God? You are letting us experience this. What do you want from me? I feel like he said, you need to figure out how to walk with as much or more peace, as much or more joy, as much or more focus than you did before all this happened. You need to figure out how to have a stronger marriage and be a better parent and have a stronger ministry and walk with me closer in the midst of this than before all this happened. Because right now you're just sitting on your butt and waiting for me to change something before you're going to do what you're supposed to do. And so the difference for me was no longer just saying, okay, I can't just say, okay, I'm okay. This situation is horrible and I'll just be okay. I had to learn that my circumstances cannot be allowed to dictate the way I live. Does that make sense? Like, to a degree that's true, right? And it might change your location, it might change the details about your life, but my circumstances cannot change the way that I live in regard to God. If they do, then which one is my God? God or my circumstances? It makes sense? Is God bigger than our circumstances? Or are our circumstances bigger than God? Do they set the pace? Or does God? And it's a really hard lesson to learn, but God said, you got to learn this, or you're going to sit on your butt because I'm not giving you what you're asking for right now, and maybe I never will. And until I came to the point where I said, God, I'm going to completely and utterly engage everything I've got in the midst of these circumstances. And I'll continue to do that even if things get worse. It wasn't until I decided that not God gave me what I was asking for, because he still hasn't. And in some ways, things have gotten harder. But I began to walk with the kind of peace and joy and consistency and relationship with God. My marriage began to grow stronger. My parenting got more effective. My ministry got more effective than it ever was before the hardship hit. So the question is, are we going to walk with perspective in the midst of this? And do we have genuine reason for optimism in our life? So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to be in Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8, and what I want to do is, if you've ever read Romans 8, there's about 1 billion things in there that could give you reason for being optimistic if you walk with that perspective in your life. But I'm going to look at 4, just 4. 4 things that for me over the last year, just like looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 12, has kept me on my knees before God and trusting him. These 4 things from Romans chapter 8 I've come back to again and again, and they have kept me walking in perspective in the midst of this. And the kind of perspective that keeps me not just trying to maintain the status quo, but the kind of perspective that keeps me optimistic and joyful about moving forward in my life where God has me. So here we go. This is going to be a bit of a machine gun thing because there's a good handful of points. But here's the first one. I'm optimistic in my life right now because I have full confidence that the result and the victory that God is bringing through my present circumstances is infinitely greater than the pain that I'm experiencing right now. I'm optimistic about my life because I walk with the perspective of the promise that the victory that God is bringing through my life right now, through the things that I'm experiencing, is greater than what I'm experiencing right now. Because what I'm going through right now, and what you're going through right now, whatever that is, if we allow God to, he is always faithful to turn that suffering and that hardship into something incredibly good. And so much greater than what we're experiencing right now. I'm really optimistic about my life because I believe that my future victory is greater than my present pain. Paul says this in chapter 8, verse 18. And once again, I talked about the suffering of Paul last week and how I really believe that he's a guy who has suffered enough to talk about suffering. And he said this in verse 18, I consider our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed within us. Again, I think he could say that because he was a guy that experienced more suffering than probably any of us ever will. But he never said here, notice, he never said that he knew exactly what we were going through. He never said that it wasn't hard or that it wasn't difficult for you to go through. What he said was that from an eternal perspective, the things that we're experiencing right now are not even worth comparing with what God is accomplishing through those things in our life and in the world around us. That makes sense? Do you guys follow that point? Is that not an encouraging thing?
Yes.
Just making sure. Those lights are still bright. It's hard to see sometimes. See, this is why I believe that James said, in the book of James, he said, brothers and sisters, consider it a joy when your faith is tested. Not because the experience is a joyful experience, but because the testing of faith develops perseverance, mature and complete, not lacking in anything. In other words, suffering stinks. Agreed?
Yes.
I think we can all agree upon that at least. Suffering stinks. If it didn't stink, it wouldn't be suffering. If pain wasn't uncomfortable, it wouldn't be pain anymore. If hardship wasn't hardship, then it wouldn't be hardship. You guys are following. So those things aren't worth rejoicing in and of themselves, are they? It's like, yes, I'm experiencing pain, and pain in and of itself it's not a good thing. It hurts. It's uncomfortable. But what is worth rejoicing about is the fact that we have a God, and as we walk with him, he takes everything that could possibly be negative or painful and somehow converts it into something incredibly worthwhile. And that's something that I've said again and again and again in my journal over the last year. God, please make this worthwhile. The suffering that we're experiencing every single day, God, please make it worthwhile. And you know what? I trust that you will because you've said that you will. And by just reminding myself of that again and again and again, day by day by day, when things get tough, I have to throw my mind back to that point. The things that God is using my pain for, the things that God is using my family's suffering to accomplish are incredibly greater than the suffering itself. And so the word worthwhile is tough to describe something like brain cancer for a family, right? Like, this is a worthwhile thing. It doesn't make sense at all by the world's standards. What in the world good could come of that? Like, maybe you can find something that might be good about it, but it in and of itself is not good. And that's true. But what's incredible about Christianity is we don't have to root around in the dirt to try to find something good. We have a God that says, I will create something good out of what you're experiencing. That is encouraging. That is more than encouraging. That is a reason to be optimistic about anything that we're experiencing. Anytime there's something hard, God says, I can use that to do something far greater than the pain you're experiencing right now. That is awesome. And that it's so important that we know that, because Christianity is not just about where you're going when you die, and it's also not just about what you're experiencing right now. Christianity, to a decent degree, this isn't the end, but it's an aspect of it, is about hope for the human condition. Paul described the three greatest things about Christianity. He said faith, hope, and love. And we love to talk about faith, and we love to talk about love in church. But for some reason, we don't talk about hope so much. Do we need hope? You bet we need hope. Especially when things get really tough and the world's perspective says, no hope. My family has very little reason for hope if God is not in the picture. But he is. And so we have incredible hope. Not just hope that someday things will be better and someday we'll be okay again. We're not just okay right now. We're experiencing what I have begun to refer to as a divine contrast. Because in our external life, when someone says, hey, Nate, how you doing, buddy? I say, horrible. Because it's a completely accurate statement about the things going on in my life. Awful. As bad as it's ever been. But at the same time, I could also answer, incredible. The best that we have ever done in our entire lives. Nothing has ever been better than it is right now. And I can say both of those, and I wouldn't be lying about either. You see where I'm going? It's this weird contrast between the things that I'm experiencing on the outside and the things that are happening on the inside and in my relationships and in my marriage and with my children. It's weird. And it doesn't make any sense, but it's awesome. In the same breath, I can say, life stinks, but it's incredible and it's never been better. And so it's not just a hope that we hold on to that someday we'll be okay again. It's a hope that says God has and will continue to use what we're experiencing to do something far greater than we could ever hope to see. That's awesome. I love that. If you don't love that, think about it some more, because it's awesome. So I'm optimistic because that's how good our God is. That he is faithful and capable to turn the worst suffering, or even the smallest suffering, into something so good and so much greater than the pain itself. That's worth being optimistic over. But there's more. There's 3 more. So we're going to keep going. Why am I optimistic about my life? Number 2, because if God is for me, then realistically speaking, what exactly is going to be against me? And why do I care about it? if the God of the universe, and somehow we forget this and we get so wrapped up in like, you know what, we're behind budget by $100 this month, honey, and we get depressed and we get wigged out about it. We're not making our finances work. And somehow we let dollars dominate our life more than the God that created us. And somehow we let the money strike fear into us instead of the God who created us and who has the world in his hands strike confidence in us. If the God of the universe is for us, and we are for him, and he is with us, and we are with him, what exactly are we worried about any time ever? Does that make sense? Like why do we let these things in our head and wig us out so much? It really is about perspective, isn't it? If I've got my financial statement month by month in my face, and that's all I can see, I'm going to be a little worried. Because life in missions is, God provides, and he always comes down to the wire, but he always provides. But it's nerve-wracking if I allow myself to try to rationalize things, and if that's all I'm looking at, it's stressful. If I take a step back and remember that God, who called us there, and who is maintaining us, and who has always maintained us, is in the picture, and is for me, then why could I be worried about being $200 a month behind? Realistically speaking, how could I really let that mess with me? It doesn't make sense. And that's not a statement that says, if you are a Christian and if you are trusting God, then God will never allow any suffering to happen and will never allow anything in life to come against you. That's evidently not true by the basis of Paul's life, by my life, and by probably all of your lives, because things come against us whether we're walking with God or not sometimes. I told you guys this last week, but my wife and I had never been closer to God and following him with a deeper level of trust than we were the week that my wife went down with a grand mal seizure. That was like the most we had ever had faith, and then she had the seizure. And then the faith was jeopardized after that, and we had to relearn how to have it. But this is not, obviously it's not a statement that says God will never allow anything to come against you if you walk with him. What it's saying is, things will come against you, but who are they? What are they compared to the fact that God is for us and with us? It's just the scale is severely imbalanced towards the side of walking with God. If you just think about it. The problem is we don't think about it, do we? The problem is we get wrapped up in exactly what is happening around us and nothing else. We don't think back to the tens of years that God has kept us okay in the past. We don't think about the promises that we read in the Bible and how God has kept other people safe and taken care of them. We think about exactly what we are experiencing right now in this moment. So you're seeing how it's a matter of perspective, right? If our eyes are on exactly one thing, then of course our emotions and our mood and whether we're going to be okay in life or not is going to be dictated by exactly what we're looking at. But perspective says, here is this thing, and it is so hard, and that's where we're at right now. This thing, and in terms of our daily experiences, is constantly pushing us to be bitter and angry and depressed and messed up. If we take our eyes off of God, which I do sometimes. And you can ask my wife, but maybe I'll be lax in my time, and I won't spend time with God, and I won't spend time renewing my perspective. Within hours, I'm messed up because life is just pushing on us that hard right now. Some of you guys get this. For some of you, it's not that hard yet, but someday it may very well be. But regardless of how tough things are, the point is perspective. Because if we're not very careful to walk with the correct perspective, we get messed up real quick. Really quick. But this is the reality. If God is for us, what does anything else matter? Is God. And that has to be the end of the debate or the end of the argument if we're thinking clearly. If we know who God is and how capable and loving and faithful he is, It's a neat thing about the Christian God. Not only do we have the most loving God, we also have the strongest one. But this is what Paul is saying. If God is for us, and we're for him, and he is with us, and we are with him, what exactly is the worst that could happen? We die? But the cool thing about Christianity is this life is just kind of a test drive for the next one. So there's hope there too. From a secular perspective, death is the worst possible outcome, isn't it? From a Christian perspective, we just go, well, I guess I'm, moving the process along a little quicker, right? See, there's hope even there. This is why Christianity is, like, one of the wonderful statements of Christianity is the idea that death has lost any sting it can hold for mankind. It is the greatest possible sting if you live in a godless world, isn't it? Because it is the end. It is utter hopelessness. For Christianity, it is only the beginning of hope. And my wife and I have come to this conclusion. If she were to lose her life to this, would she be okay? Would I be okay? In the end, what it means is she gets to go be with Jesus quicker, and I'm going to have increased difficulty in my circumstances, which is either going to crush me if I allow my circumstances to be my God, or I'm going to allow God to be my God and continue to refuse to allow my circumstances to set the pace of my life. Does that make sense? There are circumstances. We can't control them. What we can control is whether we're committed and dedicated and following Jesus. And if we're doing that, then nothing can touch us because God is for us and we're for him. Get it? That's cool. So that's number 2. If God is for us, who can be against us? Because he's a God who is not just strong, but he is faithful, and he loves us, and he cares. And I'm really optimistic about my life because I believe that God is with me, and he's for me, and he has plans to bless me and to prosper me and not to harm me, but to give me a future and a hope. And I believe that about all of us. That's exciting. So that's number 2. First, I believe that God is faithful to bring a future victory that is far greater than the pain we're experiencing presently. And number 2, I believe that if God is for us, then what in the world are we worried about to begin with? Here's number 3. I am optimistic about my life because I'm able to walk with the perspective that says that God's Spirit helps me in my weakness. And I talked about weakness a lot last week for those of you who are here, because Paul talked about it in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And the whole idea that Paul put forth was he was so weak and so tormented by this thorn in the flesh, and he cried out to God to remove it. And God said, no, my grace is going to be sufficient for you in this pain because my power is made perfect in your weakness. You know, I really think there's a lot to be said about the idea that the stronger and more capable we think we are, the less strong and capable we are in the hands of God. Make sense? I feel like we get in the way of what God wants to do. Paul himself said, this thorn in the flesh, God allowed it to keep me humble. You look at a guy like Paul, all the intelligence, all the ability, all the accomplishments in the world. He once went on like a mini bragging spree to the Galatians in the book of Galatians. And he's like, I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and I was accomplished, and I was at the head of my class. I was a Pharisee among Pharisees, a Jew among Jews, a zealot among zealots. But Paul had every reason in the world to be arrogant. Even within Christianity, having suffered the things he suffered, he did more than probably anyone else in that first century Christianity as far as disciples of Christ. He said, God allowed me to suffer, though, to keep me humble, because God said, my power is made perfect in the weakness that I've allowed you to experience. Because otherwise, you'd be getting in my way. And we sure love to get in God's way. But this is what I found. When I am weak, somehow, if I allow God to, I'm strong. And again, it's that weird paradox. It's this divine contrast between what is happening around me and my current, total inability to control anything about my life and what's happening inside of me, where there is a strength that has never been there, not even close. It is incredible weakness and incredible strength. And this is what Paul says in verses 24 through 26. He says, "Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness." God helps us when we're weak. And He's faithful to it. It's not even a matter of sometimes we get weak and you get down and God will help us stand back up. Sometimes God wants us to be down. Just like Paul. When we can get our own strength and our own capability or illusions of capability out of our heads so that we can get God in our heads. And we can get our own illusion of strength out of our heads so that God can bring real strength to us. He helps us when we're weak. And you know what? I also think there really is something to be said about the reality of experiencing God in a different way when we're weak as opposed to when we're strong. I think there's something to be said about when we are just beaten to a pulp and we can't handle life anymore. Sometimes it seems to make us more vulnerable and open to the kind of intimacy and relationship that God wants with us. And I say that because I have never experienced God's presence in a clear way, in a more intimate way than I have this year. Because I've been so weak. I've been on my knees and on my face and in tears and yelling and just broken this entire year. And my wife has too. And both of us will tell you clearly we've never felt God closer to us than we have. I say, God, please make this worthwhile. And He's constantly doing that in intimacy and relationship with Him and making us stronger, more capable as parents, as spouses, as ministers and tools in His hand for His kingdom. And this is the thing, if we are always carrying ourselves, how are we ever going to experience God carrying us? We can't. If we're always capable and we're always strong, we don't need anybody, then how are we ever going to experience the reality of the God who we do need, whether we know it or not? Sometimes God has to let us really get it before we'll get it. Sometimes God has to let the illusion of our strength and the illusion of how great and strong we are fade away so that we can see that we really actually need Him to be strong or even just to be okay. The thing, before things got really tough, I could go a handful of days. I could go a week without getting my Jesus infusion. My Sunday morning, yeah, okay, I got some worship, got a good message, I can do this. And then maybe 5-6 days in, I'd start to fade, but things weren't all that hard. Now God has said, okay, you know what? If you're not going to pursue me consistently, I'm going to let you fall apart in a matter of hours. Because life is just pushing and pulling like that right now. It's hard, and it stinks, but it's so good, and it's so worthwhile. It really is. Because God can make it that way. Not because it is in and of itself. Last point. I'm optimistic because I really believe that God is working everything in our lives toward the good. For the good of those who love Him and who are called according to His purpose. And that's us. This is what Paul says in verse 28. And we know that in all things, for those who love God, all things work together for the good, according to those who are called, or for those who are called according to His purpose. And the Greek word there for all means all. There's no trick there. It's every possible thing that we experience or see or go through in our lives. God, if we are allowing Him to and walking with Him, is working those things for our good. And again, it's just like we said earlier, the world can't understand how this could work, but there's not a single thing that we are experiencing that God cannot work and transform into something that can bring about glory. And that's exciting. And we see things in our life right now where they look completely and utterly bad, and we're waiting for them to get fixed or go away. But the cool thing is, God is not just a fixer, He is a redeemer. You know the difference? Fixing a situation is bringing it back up to par. Redeeming a situation is turning it from something horrible into something incredible. It's taking a broken building that is a hazard to everyone's health and turning it into a hospital. Does that make sense? You see the difference? And so God is turning a situation that here's the thing. Suffering can go one of two ways. God doesn't say here, all of your suffering I will use to do great things whether you want me to or not. It says, for those who love him, for those who follow him, who are with him, who are walking with him, God can turn that incredible garbage into incredible goodness. And when you suffer, when hard stuff happens, the situation my wife and I, my family is going through right now, I think it has completely equal potential to destroy our family or to turn us into something far greater than we've ever been. And you know, I have dear, dear friends who have been on the destroyed side of the equation. And it's very sad, but hardship hits, and which way are you going to go? Are you going to try to handle it yourself and buckle down and be okay? Or are you going to hit your knees and be weak and seek Jesus? And they choose this way. And I've seen so many dear friends of mine with broken marriages, broken families, broken lives, because they try to handle it themselves because they're strong, they're capable, when they're not. I think the situation that God has allowed my family to experience has complete equal potential to destroy the Evans family or to turn it into something far greater than we could ever hope to be in and of ourselves in our own power. And you know what we're doing right now? In the last year, we're going this way. And we're seeing it happen. And some of you have told me, you seem different than you were a year ago when you were here, and I am. Here's the thing. I was journaling the other day, and I said, God, you know, it was under your watch that the home that was our life fell to pieces because we lost our life, okay? Gone. We lost our life, and I even reflected as I was just processing with God, we never got it back. Our home crumbled to the ground, and we never got our life back. But you have been faithful in the last year to build something different. Not something easier, but something better. That makes sense? Yep. It is not easy, but it is better. It is not fun, but it is worthwhile. It's not an experiential happiness, but it is such a joy and a peace that we've never experienced before. And there's a difference there. Because God is not a fixer, He's a redeemer. He didn't fix our life back and give us back what we always had before. He let it fall to the ground and has established something completely different, redeemed from the pile of the wreckage that He left behind. And that's cool. Because maybe you're looking at a thing right now and you're like, this is the worst thing I've ever experienced. This is awful. There's nothing good about this. But if you will allow God to, there's going to come a day when you look behind and you will call it worthwhile. And you will call it good. Not the experience of it, but the result that God built from it. And that's a reason to be optimistic, because that's perspective. It's all about that perspective. And these are the promises of God. And here's the question. Are we going to be allowing our peace and our joy, and whether we're okay or whether we are just surviving or falling apart or thriving or anything in between, are we going to allow that to rest on the condition of how we feel or what we see around us or our circumstances? Are they the condition? Are they God in our lives? Or are we going to walk with perspective and optimism because of what God has said to us? Because He's God. Two ways. And so often we let our circumstances be our God, and God is somewhere beneath that. Maybe not in our minds. Maybe if we were to write down our opinions, we would say the right thing. But is saying something really mean anything if we're not living it? Does saying, I trust God, mean anything if we are overwhelmed by stress the moment we go back home and look at our bills again? Does saying, I trust God to do something great in what I'm doing, mean anything when I fall into depression tomorrow when things get tough again? It doesn't. It's word service. Here's what I believe, but this is not how I live, and therefore it's not valuable at all. But this is the question. This is the reality of God. Whether we can see it or not, if we allow him to, he's always working. I have seen the things that he has done through our situation, and there's a lot of things that I haven't seen. And they keep cropping up. People will send us a message here and there and say, you never knew this, but this is what God did through your guys' faithfulness to this time. This is not some kind of special thing for like those people who are like those heroes of the faith or people who experience extraordinary suffering. This is just a principle for all pain and all hardship and all suffering, that if we allow God to, he is faithful to not only fix it, but redeem it into something incredible. And again, that's perspective. Because I believe that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the future victory that God has in store for us and is bringing out of that suffering. The band could come up. We're going to be wrapping up here, but I really believe that because God is for us, nothing else can be against us, and we have reason to be optimistic there. I believe that God's Spirit is working in us in our weakness if we allow it to. And by bringing us low, I really believe that God can bring us to a place of strength. And I believe that God is working to bring all things in our life towards the good as we love him and as we trust him and as we follow him. And everything, there are going to be times, and if you're there right now, I relate with you at a very deep level, but there are going to be times where the external circumstance says everything is falling apart. And that might not just be hyperbole, that might be completely realistic and true when everything in your life is falling apart. But here's the thing. Your life falling apart is always going to refer to the circumstances around you. And here's the question. Is your peace and your joy and your okayness with your life based on your external circumstances, or is it based on Jesus? Because Jesus doesn't fall apart. Jesus is not conditional. He is there, he's capable, and he's okay. And the reason my family and I are not just okay, and we're not just trying to keep our head above water and survive, the reason why we are, I feel like God told me, you guys are crushing it right now. I have it in my journal. You guys are crushing it. I'm like, thanks. Feels good to be told that by God. But he said, you guys are doing what I want you to do right now. The difference between falling apart, surviving, and thriving, to add an extra rhyme in there, the difference is, what am I basing my peace and my joy and my focus upon? Is it the circumstances around me, or is it Jesus? So I hope that all of us can walk with that kind of perspective, because it's been the only thing that's kept us okay. So Father, it's so easy to say stuff like this and to have it in our heads and then to go back to real life and go back to the house and go back to work and whatever else, go back to the relationship and experience the sickness and the pain again. It's so easy to see those things and experience them and lose track of the perspective. But Father, just please, we cry out that you would imprint this upon our minds. You would help us to seek out your promises when we forget them. You would help us to connect ourselves with other people that can remind us of the things that we forget so easily. And whatever we have to do to keep those things in our head, would you help us to walk with the perspective that gives us genuine reason for optimism in our lives and hope in our lives? Because we have reason for it, whether we know it right now or not. Thank you, God, that you're faithful to turn horrible things into wonderful things. Thank you that you are strong enough to do that. And thank you that as we follow you and trust you, that you can turn the worst experience in our lives into the best strength and the best relationship and the best opportunity and the best accomplishment in your kingdom. We're grateful to your love and to your faithfulness and to your power, God. Amen.